Hello, good evening, and welcome to another episode of the True Crime Cocktail Hour, your weekly therapy session, your weekly little treat after a tough week of work. And this is where we sit down, relax, have a drink if you want. And since you're already here and you are interested in true crime, just like me, why don't I tell you about a mysterious true crime case? On today's episode of the True Crime Cocktail Hour, November 2006, Belgium. Opglabeek is a small community with many industrial areas and many large fields close to the Belgian border. Susan, William, Thomas, and Caitlin are four friends, and they all live their separate lives in different parts of Belgium. But every weekend, the four of them get together to pursue their common hobby: skydiving. All four of them are very experienced skydivers, and the routine is pretty much always the same. They always jump out of the plane together, they do formations in the air, do a handstand or whatever. They calm down together, and then they let the evening fade with a glass of wine or a barbecue, and it's always a blast. And it was also supposed to be that way on the 18th of November 2006. Now the four of them, they're sitting on this plane. It's a beautiful, sunny and warm autumn day, perfect for skydiving. All four of them have their parachutes on their backs, and now they're just waiting for the headset signal that they can jump. And the signal comes. William, Thomas, and Caitlin, they all jump out together. Susan, she missed the signal, or the other three were just too fast for her. Anyway, she jumps a few seconds after them. But only 3 of those 4 parachutes will open, because beforehand someone had cut the cord of the 4th parachute cleanly and deliberately with a pair of scissors. This is the True Crime Cocktail Hour, and this is the story of the infamous skydiving murder. Oh dear Lord, that's a lot of gin. Caitlin unknowingly jumped out of the plane without a parachute. And normally it's supposed to go like this. Once you have 4,000 feet left to go, you get a signal again over the headset that tells you that it's time to open up the parachute. Now Thomas, William, and Susan, they all open up their parachute, everything is going well, and they slowly glide towards the ground. But something seems to be wrong with Caitlin's parachute. The 3 friends just watch her, panicking and desperately trying to open up the parachute, but it doesn't open. And then Caitlin goes and she tries to open the spare parachute, and that one won't open either. So Caitlin is free falling, and she's screaming and she's panicking, and William, he tries to turn around in the air and trying to get to her, but it's in vain. And Caitlin plummets towards the ground at 125 miles an hour. At the same time, a resident, she's outside hanging up her laundry in her garden, when suddenly she hears this massive rustling, and then a short time later, a brief, loud bang. So William, he's the first one to get to the ground, and he just throws off his parachute and he starts running. And he starts running to the direction where Caitlin has supposedly landed, which was close to the residential area. This man is running through the streets and he's screaming her name. He's yelling, "Caitlin, Caitlin." And then suddenly he comes across a house with an ambulance right in front of it. So the emergency paramedics, they had tried to resuscitate Caitlin, but to no avail. Caitlin had died instantly. So the police was also informed, and they arrive at the scene, and William immediately starts walking towards them, repeating over and over again, something must have been wrong with the parachute, something must have been wrong with the parachute. The investigators couldn't agree more, because when they had examined this parachute very closely, they noticed that somebody had cut the cord cleanly and deliberately with either a knife or a pair of scissors. My goodness. That's an awful way of killing a person, don't you think? Jeez Louise, calm down. Oh, and the spare parachute? It was just gone. It was nowhere to be found. It was just poof, gone. Caitlin is 38 years old, and she lives near Antwerp with her husband and her 2 children. Now her husband, he works as a, here we go, jeweler. I couldn't figure out if Caitlin had a job or if she was just a stay-at-home mom, which is also a job, I know, don't come for me. The important thing is, and that thing is clear, the weekend belongs to her. and she always spent it in Opklaberg together with her 3 friends. With 2,300 jumps under her belt, Caitlin was considered to be a very, very experienced skydiver. And as it turned out, she had apparently no enemies. So the investigation first focused on the husband, probably for statistical reasons, but he was ruled out pretty quickly. He just didn't fit the profile of the killer. Investigators thought that only a very experienced parachutist with the right opportunity could have committed this murder. And so it had to be one of those 3 friends, Thomas, William, or Susan. So the first one who came into focus was William, because right away he openly admitted to having an affair with Caitlin. Now, investigators soon found out that Thomas and Susan knew about this relationship. What they didn't know is that Caitlin was actually married. She had always told them that she was divorced. But William, he didn't really have much of a motive. He claimed that Caitlin was the one and only his big love, and also his grief over her death seemed to be very genuine. And so his questioning remained fruitless for the time being. Also, in the meantime, somebody else had made themselves very suspicious, and that was Susan, because when she arrived for questioning, she suddenly announced, out of nowhere, that she found the spare parachute near the crash scene, high up in a tree. And that was strange, because you see, this spare parachute, it was barely the size of a small towel, right? I don't know if you've ever seen one, but it's really not that big. And investigators doubted that you could just spot it high up in a tree somewhere just by chance. Nevertheless, a reconstruction with other parachutists showed that it was much easier to see from above where the spare parachute had landed, especially if you jumped out of the plane after the victim. And a motive also pretty quickly crystallized when investigators found out that our guy William over here, despite his claim that Caitlin was his one and only love, was also sleeping with Susan. Get this, Susan knew about the affair of William and Caitlin. Caitlin had no clue about William and Susan. Susan and Caitlin were good friends. So many solutions. The love triangle. Here it is again. So investigators went up to William and asked him, "Hey, why did you just continue both relationships?" To which William replied that he had actually no idea. And William explained to investigators that he had always made it very clear with Susan that he would choose Caitlin over her in doubt. Very nice. And furthermore, William explained that he was kind of scared of rejecting Susan. First of all, he still cared about her and he did not want to hurt her feelings. Second of all, and I think that's the real reason, he was always afraid that Susan would go over to Caitlin's husband and tell him what's up. And so to him, it just seemed easier continuing both relationships. But that was the problem. Susan knew that she was, and always will be, the number 2. Now that is already very humiliating, but at some point it was unbearable and Susan couldn't take it anymore. And that was the case on the weekend before the murder. So this is what happened, right? Susan and William were at William's place after the jump, and actually the 2 of them just wanted to spend the weekend together, have a little time for themselves, when suddenly Caitlin showed up at William's completely unannounced. And here is the even bigger problem. William had asked of Susan to keep their relationship a secret. He did not want Caitlin to know because he was afraid she was going to leave him. To be fair, she probably would have. I don't know why Susan put up with that, but she did. And now that Caitlin was at William's place, Susan suddenly had to pretend like she wasn't having an affair with William. And so while Caitlin went upstairs and slept in William's bed, Susan had to do with the couch in the living room. And to make things even worse, Susan also had to listen to the 2 of them having fun upstairs, Now don't get me wrong, Susan previously had tried to sabotage the relationship between Caitlin and William. And that was in 2005, 1 year before the murder, when Caitlin suddenly received anonymous letters. And they said something along the line of, "How can you do this to your children and your husband?" But Caitlin, just ignored these letters. And so at some point, Susan saw no other way out but to get rid of her love rival once and for all. And so while Caitlin and William were doing the deeds upstairs and Susan was left back in the living room, she grabbed Caitlin's parachute Caitlin had left in the living room, and Susan cut the cord of the parachute with a pair of scissors. And she did this very carefully because Caitlin, as an experienced skydiver, she didn't notice anything unusual on the weekend of her crash. So the trial against Susan began on the 24th of September 2010, 4 years after the murder. But the prosecution stood on some very shaky ground, you know? I mean, the love triangle and the motive and this theory, it all fitted together very nicely. But they did not have any forensic evidence. No DNA was found. The murder weapon has never been found. Susan pleaded not guilty. And there were no witnesses to the crime. So there was a motive and an opportunity, and that was it, you know? So the defense team remained pretty much unimpressed, you know, by the prosecution. So every time, like, the prosecution came forward with their arguments, the defense team was like,
okay, and?
Particularly disturbing is, and I don't know if you know that, but they have like a camera attached to your helmet when you jump. Horrific, but also unhelpful, was the camera footage of Caitlin's helmet camera. This camera, it filmed everything, you know? The sound of it all, you can hear Caitlin panicking and screaming and trying to get this parachute to open up, all the way down to her hitting the ground. You could see her dying in court. Also, quick, very interesting side note to this case. During the trial, the prosecution and the press received another anonymous letter. And this anonymous letter claimed that William was the murderer, and that Thomas, William, and Susan were very much aware of that. The motive? William wanted to get rid of Caitlin and had allegedly once said, quote, "The free fall will get her," end quote. But nobody believed this letter, and Susan was found guilty even though they had only circumstantial evidence, and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. It was said that Susan was very clingy and very needy, very much up for attention, that she wanted to have William for herself and get rid of her love rival once and for all. It was also said that Susan was depressed with psychotic traits and that she was constantly plagued by a constant fear of being abandoned. Susan was released in 2022, not that long ago, but she's still controlled with an ankle bracelet. She still, to this day, maintains her innocence. This, my dear children, was the rather short story of the infamous skydiving murder. Anyway, let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Also hit that subscribe button, go crazy with it. It would really make my day. Also give this video a thumbs up. It shows me that you enjoy what I do, and yeah, I get excited about it every single time. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead of you. Try to relax a little bit, and I hope you have a wonderful next week ahead of you. And speaking of that, if you don't have any plans next Friday, why don't you meet me here for another cocktail and, of course, another mysterious true crime case. Mommy loves you. Mwah. Bye. I didn't finish my cocktail. There's so much gin in it. Oh my god.